Hi there, I'm Joe Tadaro. Welcome back to Put Games to Work. Okay, so in our last video, we made the distinction between a game's theme and a game's mechanic, where the game's theme is the subject matter of the game or what the game is about, as represented in the language, the art, the visuals, the imagery of the game. Whereas the mechanic are the structures, components, and rules that create the conditions for making choices within the game. So, one of the common mistakes I see instructional designers make when they're taking their first crack at creating an instructional game is an overemphasis on the theme, really thinking about the theme to make it look and feel like a game without paying a lot of attention to the mechanics for choice making. My recommendation is that we start our discussion with mechanics. We'll get to the value of good theme and how you leverage theme in instructional games. But for now, let's start with mechanics and start our exploration ultimately towards our first prototyping session. Today we're going to start with the mechanic, the event deck. Now the event deck, the reason why we're starting with it is really two reasons. First, it's a pretty simple mechanic to grasp. And second, we can really start to envision the applicability of the event deck as a mechanic to performance situations or performance outcomes and business outcomes. We could really start to envision its value and start to think about how you leverage these types of mechanics to create rich choice-making opportunities to practice performance towards a particular business outcome. So what we're going to do, we're going to take a look at a couple of games that use the event deck mechanic. One is a pretty well-known game called Pandemic. You might have heard of it or played it. The other is a little less known, but a fantastic game called Robinson Crusoe by Portal Games. So both use the event deck mechanic in very different ways, but they have something in common. They're both cooperative games. Now, event decks aren't exclusive to cooperative games, but you see them often in cooperative games. And the reason why is because in cooperative games, you're not trying to play against each other to win. You're working together to win against the challenges that the game presents. And one of the ways that the game presents challenges in cooperative games is through an event deck. So let's dig in, take a look at the event deck and how it works in Pandemic and Robinson Crusoe, and then we'll debrief. Okay, so this is Pandemic. In Pandemic, you and your fellow players are playing as a team of researchers, medics, scientists, caregivers, seeking to research, treat, and ultimately eradicate 4 different diseases that are breaking out all over the planet, where these diseases are represented by these red, black, blue, and yellow cubes. If you and your team are able to treat, beat back, and research and ultimately eradicate or cure these diseases, you win. If any of the diseases breaks out beyond your control, the team loses as a whole. So again, this is a cooperative game. So the game is fighting against you as a team. And the primary way that the game does that is through this deck of cards right here. That is Pandemic's event deck. Now, we're not going to go through the entirety of the game. I'll give you a brief overview, but really we want to concentrate on what this deck does right here. So on your turn, if you're a player, you have a bunch of different actions that you can take. You could research a disease to try to approach a cure. You could try curing a disease. You can move across the board to locations where the disease has broken out and actually treat the disease and remove cubes from the board. You have a certain number of actions that you're trying to maximize the impact that you have on the board to cure the disease and treat the existing breakouts. After your turn is over, that's when the game gets to fight back. And again, it does so with this event deck. Now you see this little thing right here, this little tile that moves along these spaces. In various situations in the game, this tile is going to move forward. And you see there's numbers under each one of these spots. That's how many cards that you draw from the event deck. It starts at 2, and as things get really bad, after each player's turn, you draw 4 different cards from the event deck. Right now, we're drawing 2. So let's see what happens. Basically, each card represents where the disease is going to break out. In this case, the disease is breaking out in Khartoum with a new yellow cube. Khartoum is right here. Now, thankfully, when we add a cube to Khartoum, we're still okay. It's where you actually add cubes to where there's already 3, means there's going to be a breakout or an outbreak of that particular disease that spills over to other cities that are nearby, making the disease worse. So we've taken our first card from the event deck, added to Khartoum, and now we're going to take a second, and it's Baghdad. Notice Baghdad already has 3 cubes. According to the rules of the game, that means that we have an outbreak where it spills into all the neighboring towns. So now we have an outbreak in Istanbul, in Cairo, in Riyadh, and in Karachi. So you can see it's already getting out of hand. Just with those 2 cards right there, we've changed the complexion of the game. Now this has become a serious hotspot of disease where it wasn't before. So that would alter the strategy that the players use to try to treat and eradicate the disease. That deck of cards, as you go through them, completely transforms the nature of the board and requires the players to work together to alter their strategy, their approach for how they're going to win the game. It's a simple deck of cards, but its impact on your strategy as a team is absolutely significant, which is one of the reasons why this is such an elegant game. So that's the first example of a simple event deck for creating conditions for altering the choices that you make in the context of the game, creating a bit of chaos that the team has to react to in cooperation with each other. Okay, so this is Robinson Crusoe. Now, Robinson Crusoe is a pretty complex game, so we're only going to go into a small part of it to really feature the event deck mechanic. Now, while it's a fairly complicated game, the idea of it is pretty simple. You and the other players are stranded on a desert island, and you all win if you're able to survive, create a signal fire that signals a passing ship so you can be rescued. You lose, everybody loses if even one of the player's characters die. So your goal is to stay alive, keep everybody else alive, and get off the island with a signal fire. So again, we're not going to go into the entirety of how the game works, but we're going to do a quick highlight. On your turn, there's a number of things you can do. So you start out on the beach over here on the island, and one of the things you could do is explore the island. And one of the reasons you might explore is to maybe move your camp to a safer location, or a location that's closer to resources like food or wood. So you could explore the island on your turn. You could build a shelter. You could build a shovel. These are all the things over here that you can build that will make your life better and increase your chances of survival and success. You can also gather resources from the island. So the places that you've already explored might have wood or food on them. They also might have animals that you can hunt. So there's a whole bunch of different things that you can do on your turn. Now, at the beginning of every round, we draw from this particular deck, which is the main event deck. So at the beginning of every single round, something new is going to happen that players are going to have to react to. In this particular case, oh my goodness, they found a body on the beach. Now this symbol indicates that morale has gone down. You need to keep morale up as well as survive. And what we're going to see is you actually have to bury it. And if you don't bury the body, things get actually worse. So this is a good representation of a more detailed card or event deck card than we saw in Pandemic. In Pandemic, you'll recall, it was just, where does this new disease go? In Robinson Crusoe, the event deck actually is pretty intricate. Some very descriptive things happen that can make people's lives more difficult. So this actually goes right down here. Let me adjust this. This goes right down here, and we're going to have to deal with this. So first off, morale goes down, and if we don't take some time to bury that body, then morale is going to get even worse for us. So that is a decision that we have to make, is do we devote time that we could otherwise be using to get resources, to build shelters? Do we take the time to bury this body? If we don't, we might have more resources. We might get more food. If we do, then we avoid losing morale. So that's the main event deck. And again, it happens every single round. Every time you start a new round, something's going to happen that's going to change the nature of the game through this event deck. Now, as you can see, there's 3 other decks of cards down here. Those are also 3 event decks that are specific to different things that you can do. This event deck happens sometimes when you build something. This event deck is stuff that happens when you're actually gathering resources on the island. This green one is when things happen when you actually explore the island. So you have several different event decks going on here that can alter the game in very fundamental and interesting ways. Now, how does this work? So here's the thing. Each player has these 2 action pawns. Every single round, you can either do 1 or 2 things represented by these action pawns. if you do one thing, you're basically combining these pawns into one action, which means you're taking your time to make sure you do it right. Let's say that I want to explore a part of the island that remains unexplored, and I would go over here. That basically means, since I'm devoting both of my action pawns to that exploration, it's guaranteed to work because I'm taking my time, making sure the job gets done right. But here's the thing, there's a lot to get done in this game. So sometimes you have to move more quickly, and that involves risk. So I might split these action cubes across two different things. I might explore the island with one, and say I might try to build something like build a shelter, or might build a spear with the other one. In that case, if I do that, I'm taking a risk that something's going to go wrong because I'm trying to get more done in a single day. So when, let's say that I devote one of my pawns here to trying to build something. What I do is I roll these dice right here. There are 3 dice. This die represents whether or not I'm successful in actually building the thing I want to build. This question mark basically represents the event deck. Does something happen? Sometimes it's blank. Sometimes it has a question mark. If a question mark comes up, something went wrong or something happened along the way, and I have to draw a card from this deck. And finally, did I get hurt along the way? So this broken heart indicates I actually injured myself along the way. So let's roll this and see what happens. So in this case, I was victorious. I did get hurt, and something happened. The question mark indicates I need to take this card from the event deck. And it says hard work. You're working so hard that you get hungry. If possible, discard 1 food. That's the food icon. So I unexpectedly am going to eat more food than I'd planned for. At the end of every day, everybody's got to eat 1 food, represented by these bananas right here. And you really need to ration this food. This indicates I ate extra food, which might have really made a wreck of our plans as a group to make sure that we don't starve to death. So that's something unique that happened in this event deck. So again, you can see, even though we've only scratched the surface of Robinson Crusoe, you could see how the event decks, how they work. The main event deck, where something is guaranteed to happen every single turn, and then these individual event decks based on the choices that I make, whether or not I take risks, whether or not I decide to do a lot of things in one day to try to maximize my opportunity, but also increase the risk in the game. That alters the conditions and choices in the game. So that's Robinson Crusoe, and that's how the event deck works in this game. So that's Pandemic and Robinson Crusoe, and that's how they both use the event deck in slightly different ways. Now, how is this valuable? Well, I want you to think about situations in your workplace where folks have to work together towards a particular outcome, where the conditions in which they're working are going to change, and they need to react to those changes, and they need to do so quickly, efficiently, and successfully. I'll give you an example. Business continuity planning. Every business needs to have a business continuity plan in the event there's a local, national, or global emergency. Now consider an exercise in business continuity where the group of people are working together to respond to an emergency. And part of that exercise involved an event deck, where the event deck had little things that happened that altered the nature of the emergency and required the players to alter their approach to dealing with the emergency relative to their business continuity plan. That's an example, a pretty direct example of how the game mechanic of the event deck could help prepare a group of employees for a business continuity plan execution, and do it in a way that it feels chaotic, just like it would in real life, but in the safe situation of an instructional game. That's just one example of how the event deck can create the conditions for really effective choice making, allowing folks the opportunity to react to an ever-changing environment towards a particular successful outcome. I invite you to suggest other ideas for how an event deck might be a valuable addition to an instructional activity or game in the comments below. Until next time, when we talk about our next big game mechanic, I'm Joe Tadaro. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe.